Genesis chapter 36. Genesis chapter 36 might not seem like an important chapter to us, and it's not necessarily one that we're overly thrilled about to look at. But once you begin to dig a little bit deeper, you realize that this is an important note for the children of Israel. The children of Israel, throughout all of their generations, all the way from Moses all the way to the time of Christ, will deal with their arch nemesis. And their arch nemesis is Edom or Esau. And it goes all the way back to the rivalry between the two twins, Jacob and Esau, who struggled for the birthright and the blessing, struggled, to have supremacy over one another. And it's really important for the children of Israel as they are coming out of the land of Egypt, going back into the promised land, to be able to understand what in the world. Why do we have this problem? Who are these people? Why do they hate us so much? Because it's almost like the Edomites, the descendants of Esau, they seem like they just hate Israel without a cause. And they do. And the reason that all of that happens is because this is a spiritual war. A spiritual war that started with two brothers, Jacob and Esau, who both wanted a blessing and fought for everything related to what happened there in the book of Genesis. And an Esau who despised the blessing of God. He sold it for a bowl of pottage or porridge, if you will. And sometimes, this is the lesson we should learn about Edom, which is another name for Esau, that sometimes huge consequences come from small choices. Just one day make one bad choice, Thankfully, not every bad choice we make results in catastrophic consequences, but sometimes it's just one small thing. You turn the wrong way down the road and you make a wrong choice, or you steal something just, accidentally, if there's such thing as that, or you look at something that you shouldn't look at, or say something that you shouldn't say to a family member or a church member, someone else, and you find that one little event sometimes is just blown off and doesn't make any difference at all. But in other times, it becomes like that first drop of rain at the continental divide that collects with other drops of rain, and that little stream of water gets larger and larger, so that it goes all the way to the Mississippi or to, the Colorado River, all because of one bad choice. And that is the reality for Esau. So let's read a little bit about it. Now, this is the genealogy of Esau, who is Edom. Remember that little phrase, this is the genealogy, chapter 26, verse 1. It's used multiple times in the book of Genesis, and some versions translate it as, this is the history of. So this is telling us, I'm going to give you the history of these people. Moses, by God's design, are giving to the nation of Israel the history of these people that live on the other side of the Dead Sea that are so problematic. Esau took his wives from the daughters of Canaan. Now, because we have been reading in the book of Genesis for a long time, we're reading what's known as narrative. It doesn't always tell us what's going on. As soon as you read that he married two Canaanites, what do? You think, oy vey, this is not good, right? This is a bad thing. Isaac was not to marry a woman of Canaan. The same thing was true for Jacob and Esau, at least for Jacob. And Rachel wanted to make sure, not Rachel, Isaac and Rebekah. Yeah, Rachel. Rachel wanted to make sure that Jacob did not marry a Canaanite. And so the fact that Esau marries a Canaanite is a problem. It's a bad thing. This is not going to turn out well. And Adah was the daughter of Elam the Hittite, and Ahalobama, I think it is, the daughter of Anah, was the daughter of Ziba the Hivite. And Basemath and Ishmael's daughter's sister, Nabajah. And again, I'm probably not pronouncing a single word name correctly there, but I'm certainly doing my best. You'll notice there that there is an intersection with Ishmael and Edom. Ishmael was the other descendant of Abraham, who is also a part of the Islamic horde, if you will. And so now we have a merger of two different strands of those that we would know as Arabs, essentially. And so Ishmael is now connected with Edom, so that the two groups are now basically going to be one. Now Adah bore Eliphaz to Esau, and Basemath bore Reuel, and Aholibamah bore Jeush, Jaalam, and Korah, and these were the sons of Esau who were born to him in the land of Canaan. Then Esau took his wives and his sons and his daughters and all his personhood and his cattle and all of his animals and all of his goods which he had gained in the land of Canaan, and he went to the country away from the presence of his brother Jacob. Now when you leave the land of Israel, not only are you leaving the relatives, what else are you leaving? The promises of God are related to the nation of Israel and the land of Israel. So you leave the land, you leave the blessing. I could give you lots of examples. Abraham left the land, went down to Egypt, got in big trouble. He left the land a second time when there was a famine, got in big trouble. His wife got kidnapped both times and brought Hagar back with him. When Isaac does the same thing, he gets in trouble. When Naomi and Elimelech from the book of Ruth, when they decide that there's no food in Israel, what do? They leave the land of Israel and they go to the land of Moab. While they're in the land of Moab, Elimelech dies, and Mahlon and Chilion, and they both die, and so all of a sudden you have three grieving widows. Leaving the land is essentially leaving the umbrella of the protection of God. So the point that he's making here, that Moses is revealing to us, is not only is Esau leaving family, but he's leaving the blessing of God. He's going into a new land, becoming a totally pagan group. So, verse 8, Genesis 36:8. So Esau dwelt in Mount Seir. Esau is Edom. This is the genealogy of Esau, the father of the Edomites, in Mount Seir. So, now that he's moved, these are the names of Esau's sons. Eliphaz, the son of Adah, the wife of Esau, and Reuel, the son of Basemath, the wife of Esau. And the sons of Eliphaz were Teman, Omar, Zephar, Gatam, and Kenaz. Now, Timnah was the concubine of Eliphaz, Esau's son, and she bore, notice this word, so not even a wife, but a concubine, so not a true marriage in every sense, an illegitimate child, if you will, a child not recognized by the normal conventions of marriage, and she bore Amalek. Amalek is an interesting name. The word Melech is the word king. So you're familiar with that. Melech is used all throughout the Old Testament for a lot of different things. Melchizedek comes from that concept, king of Salem, king of righteousness. When you put an alpha privative in front of it, the letter A, in front of a word, it means that it's not something. So we talk about biological processes, and we talk about abiological processes, those things which don't have life. Or aerobic exercise means with oxygen, and anaerobic exercise means without oxygen. What do you think it means when a person is known as Amalek, or Amalek, as we would say it in English? The person who can't be ruled. The person with no king. Essentially what his name is, Mr. Rebellion. That's Amalek. And Amalek is going to be the arch nemesis for the children of Israel from this day forward until the end of his life. And Josephus, Josephus was a Hebrew scholar who tells the history of Israel. He really makes a lot of the fact in verse 12 that Amalek came from a concubine, was considered to be, not a legitimate child along the way, and that his presence is going to be the one that is going to be carrying out the spiritual hatred against the people of God. Now, there's no verse right here that I'm reading that says that Esau and Edom, that they're going to have a spiritual hatred for the children of Israel, but that's essentially what is going to happen, and maybe demonically, there might be a sense in which Satan works especially through him. So I'm not going to read any further because there's just a whole bunch of names in the chapter, and most of them don't help us any further. You've never heard of the names. You can read them in your devotions. In fact, when you get to heaven, we should read every single genealogy that's there at least once in a while. You might meet some of these people, and you want to say, oh yeah, at least I read your name, back down there when I was in heaven. So here's what we're going to say about Esau and Edom and the importance of who they are. Esau was a man of great possibility. He had everything going for him. He was, by the way, a son of Abraham, right? Don't forget about that. Or grandson, if you will, maybe even great-grandson would be the better way to understand it. But the same thing that happened with Ishmael happens with Esau. They had a great family lineage. They would have known about the people of God. They would have known about who the Lord is because they dwelt in the land. And yet, despite all of those advantages, the fact that both Ishmael was blessed by God and Esau was also blessed by God doesn't result in anything good in their lives whatsoever. In the book of Malachi, there's an interesting phrase that says, Jacob have I loved, but Esau have I hated. It's always given people challenges and difficulties, and Paul uses it in Romans chapter 9 to deal with the concept of predestination and election. We could go there, but that would be to miss the point for our study. The point is Esau's a problem. And when you look at the life of Esau and you look at the life of the Edomites, you're going to notice that they deserve everything that they get. That there was a reason for what God did when he chose the one and not the other. That there's some significance there, and they played it out in their lives. And I could read Malachi chapter 1, verses 2 through 4, but I'm going to skip it today because of time and whatnot. They're not the chosen people of God, and neither did they earn any favor with God in the way that they lived. So I have about 6 or 7 points. I want to get through them this morning, and if I'm able to do so, I think we'll be truly blessed. First thing I would say about Esau that we learn from this chapter and from the history of Genesis and beyond is that God had truly blessed Esau. He was not excluded from the blessing of God. He was, again, a descendant of Abraham, and he was related to the people of God. He had grown up in the land of Israel, and just as significantly, that if you were to read Genesis chapter 36, there's going to be a word that's used 32 times, and it's the word chief. And there are 32 chiefs, and there's one king that's mentioned as the descendants of Esau. And the point is that these people did very well, thank you. That they did fine. That they grew and were significant, and they made resources and money and had families and enjoyed what we call the common grace of God. The common grace of God are the blessings that God gives to all people. You know, God certainly gives blessings to his children and to those who walk with him and know him. But he also makes his sun to shine on the righteous and on the unrighteous and on his friends and on his enemies. And God blessed the people of Edom. God blessed the children of Esau. And if you would speak with Esau, in the future, you would have to say something like, well, it wasn't that God didn't give you a chance. You became a problem. And in fact, throughout the Old Testament, in the book of Deuteronomy, I lost where the verse is, but it's in there somewhere. It's a big Bible, but we'll find it later. That Esau was told, not Esau was told, the children of Israel were told that Esau is your brother. Don't hate Esau. And you could see some reasons why they would be tempted to hate Esau, because Esau was a problem. And probably most of the problems go back just like to the Hatfields and the McCoys. We don't really know why they're still fighting with one another, but they're still shooting each other because of something that great-grandpa did way back then. Everything that's happening with these people is because of that reason. They still resent. They were unwilling to forgive the differences between both Jacob and Esau. And so as we would understand who they are, the first thing we would say is, number one, Esau had great blessings, great possibilities. He started out in a good place, but he chose not to adequately walk with the Lord. The second thing we would see about him is that in the end, he becomes a symbol of spiritual darkness and really the battle between good and evil. And so when we see the relationship of the families, we don't really understand what happens until we go to the book of Exodus chapter 17. If you would go with me to Exodus chapter 17, we get the first exposure to Amalek. Exodus 17 and verse 10. 17:10. And so Joshua did as Moses said unto him, and he fought with Amalek. Now, Amalek's his relative. I mean, they're not that close. It's been 400 years, but they're relatives. But Amalek comes over to fight against Israel. And so Moses and Aaron and Hur went up to the top of the hill, and it was that when Moses held up his hands that Israel prevailed, and it was that when he let his hands down that rebellion prevailed, Amalek, the man without a king, or the man who can't be ruled. Verse 12, but Moses' hands became heavy so that they took a stone and put it under him, and he sat on it, and Aaron and Hur supported his hands, one on the one side and the one on the other, and his hands were steady until the going down of the sun. And so Joshua defeated Amalek and his people with the edge of the sword. And then then the Lord said to Moses, write this for a memorial in the book and recount it in the hearing of Joshua, that I will utterly blot out the remembrance of Amalek from under heaven. Moses built an altar there and called on the name of the Lord my banner, Jehovah Nissi, the Lord who is publicly reminding us that we can identify and collect with him. For he says, because the Lord has sworn, the Lord will have war with Amalek from generation to generation. Now, if you didn't know anything about the history of Amalek, if you didn't know anything about geography and where Amalek is at, you didn't realize, the differences, you would you could say, why is the Lord so unhappy with Amalek? Well, there's more going on in the story than maybe we would recognize. And Josephus, here's the way he described it. And before I tell you what Josephus said, let me just stop and ask you, do you know where the Edomite territory is? The Edomite territory is way over to the east, is on the other side of the Dead Sea. Was Israel going to go through Edom to go into the promised land? No. Right. They weren't going there. And so here, this would be like if we were traveling, for example, we were down in Cancun, and we're coming up through Mexico, and we're going into the United States, trying to get through Tijuana, and the people of Sweden come over and decide that they want to stop us from coming into the United States. We would say, what gives? Why do you care about what we're doing down here? Israel was not going through Edom. Edom was, and I read two different numbers. I used a little map, and I tried to do the thing that you do with the ruler. I was guessing anywhere between 300 and 400 miles away. One person said that they were as far as 1,000 miles away. So a longer distance between the two of them. Here's Amalek over on the other side, minding their own business. Here comes this brand new people of God, the children of Israel. They've just been rescued from Pharaoh in Egypt, and now they're going into the land that is theirs. And Edom wakes up and says, we can't let them get back into the land. You see how significant that is? If Edom and the people of Esau are saying, we don't want the children of Israel to get back into the promised land, they were as bad as Pharaoh. They were as wicked as the Egyptians, trying to keep them from enjoying the blessing of God. And what's really interesting is all of the other nations, of the Canaanite nations, they had a fear of the children of Israel. They knew that God was blessing them and no one attacked them, except for this hubris group of people, the Amalekites, who thought that they were going to stop them from enjoying the blessing of God. Now, you see that one concept, that the Amalekites wanted to keep the children of Israel from inheriting the Abrahamic blessings. Did we see that happen before? That is rehashing the struggles with Jacob and Esau. You know, the whole blessing and the birthright, they're in it all over again. We're going to get the land. And in fact, Josephus adds something, and Josephus is typically pretty good. He's a good historian, and he adds details that were not included in the Bible. He says that the Amalekites actually sent messages to the people of Canaan and said, let's go down and fight against Israel. Let's stop them from coming into the land. So here are the things that he says. I'd like to read about 4 or 5 bullet points. He says, number one, when Amalek came to fight against Israel, Israel was not even going to pass through Edom at all. That certainly is true. Number two, that Amalek was afraid to fight them head on. And that story is simply this. They were at a place known as Rephidim, and we call that Meribah, or Mara. That's the place where the children of Israel didn't have any water, and the water was bitter, and they cried out against God, and they were in a place of discouragement. They were a place of a lack of resources. And so this is where Amalek comes. And so he was afraid to fight them head on, and he comes from behind, and he fights against the sick people and the stragglers, whatnot. He tried, number 3, to get the Canaanite nations to fight with him against Israel. And his main goal, according to Josephus, was to stop Israel from enjoying the spiritual promises of God. And so what the Jewish nation has said for many years is simply this. I'm going to read from a 13th century rabbi whose name is Nahmanides, Nahmanides. He says that Exodus chapter 17 justifies God's command to wipe out the Amalekites or the Edomites on the ground, whereas other nations trembled when they heard that God had protected them in Egypt. Amalek defied God in choosing to attack the people of God, Israel. Thus, it was God's honor that was at stake. And so the important thing for the Lord was, if essentially Edom wants to fight against God, and Edom wants to fight against God's people, then Amalek, again, Edom was the bigger name, Amalek was the smaller name for them, then Amalek has earned their punishment, which is to be totally wiped out. And that one truth there, that Amalek is against the blessings of God for the people of God. They're the spiritual nemesis of the children of Israel. You see play out through all of the history of Israel. Now let me give you just a few examples of how this continues to play out. The first thing that you will know about it is when they come into the land and they're ready to choose a king, they choose King Saul. God, allows them to choose King Saul because he's taller than everybody else. And one of the first responsibilities that God gives to King Saul is to go wipe out Amalek, of all people, because they are, again, the spiritual nemesis of the children of Israel. They had a personal grudge. They want to keep the children of Israel from getting their blessings. So what does Saul do? So Saul goes against them, and he goes to war, and we don't know any details whether they came against Saul, but he wipes out everybody except for the king. And the king's name is Agag. And Samuel comes to Saul and says, "Hey, how'd the battle go?" "Well, great, we wiped him out, and everything is good." And then Samuel says, "But what's that? The sheep bleeding in my ears." And so then Saul says, "Oh yeah, we saw some really nice sheep. We decided not to kill them, and we're going to bring them back, and we're going to sacrifice to God." And in addition to that, they didn't kill Agag, so he allowed the king to live. Now here's what, again, so please forgive me for using Josephus too much, but there are just so many details that he adds that are probably historically correct, and we can talk about them. What Josephus says is the reason that King Saul kept Agag alive is there was a rumor that Agag knew or had a whole bunch of silver and gold and treasures buried. And so he says that Agag had promised to show Saul where the hidden treasures were, and so that's why he kept him alive. Well, Samuel comes along and does what we would call is one of the worst examples of grossness in the Bible. The text says that he hacked Agag to pieces. And if you didn't understand the things that we just talked about in the last 10 minutes, about how Amalek is the spiritual nemesis of God and the enemy of God's people, it wouldn't make any sense why he would, cut him into little bits and pieces there that day. But God was carrying out the judgment that Amalek had understood. And Josephus says one more thing. The other thing that Josephus says that's really striking is simply that when Agag was how do you put it? He was being held in chains or whatever before he was killed by Samuel, that Saul allowed him and his wife to cohabitate. And this isn't in the Bible. This is just another example of what history has suggested to us. It suggests that there was one descendant of Agag that lived. Anybody know who that one descendant would be? crazy. Go to the book of Esther, and there's a man by the name of Haman, who is the sworn enemy of the children of Israel, and he's getting ready to wipe them out. He goes through that whole long process, and don't even need to rehearse the book of Esther, but it says about Haman that now Haman was an Agagite, meaning he was a descendant of Agag, who should have been killed by Saul, who was a descendant of Esau, who was one of the Amalekites, the unruly people. And in the end, it's that same battle between good and evil, between righteousness and unrighteousness. We frankly could say between God and Satan. And so, in addition to just saying that Amalek or the Edomites were against the Israelites, it really is the root of all anti-Semitism. It's always this hatred, and it shows up over and over and over again, in which people in the Old Testament hate the children of Israel. It was the anti-Semitism of Haman that caused him to do what he was going to do with Esther over in the land of Persia. In addition to all of those things, I kind of jumped forward, but David comes along, and David is a representative of Christ, right? He's like Messiah. One of the first things that David is to do is to subdue the Amalekites, and he does. Saul doesn't, but David comes along, and he subdues them and takes control over them and continues to keep them down because he is a representative of God. They continue to live. They survive along the way until you get to the time of Obadiah. And I want you to go with me to the book of Obadiah, just one chapter, verse 16. So I have to give you a minute to find it. We should quote the books of the Bible so you can turn there. But Isaiah, Jeremiah, Lamentations, Ezekiel, Daniel, Isaiah, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, right? So look for Amos. You're almost there. Jonah, Micah, Nahum, before. It's such a small book along the way. Obadiah, verse 16. The whole book of Obadiah, by the way, is a burden or an oracle of the Lord against Edom. Verse 16 says, here's what they do. For as you drank on my holy mountain, so shall all the nations drink continually. Yes, they shall drink and swallow, and they shall be as though they had never been. But on Mount Zion there shall be deliverance. Okay, I'm not reading the right one. Verse 10, not 16, verse 10. It says in verse 10, Obadiah, 1 chapter, verse 10, for violence against your brother Jacob, shame shall cover you, and you shall be cut off forever. In the day that you stood on the other side, in the day that the strangers carried his forces captive, and foreigners entered into his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, even then you were as one of them. But you should not have gazed on the day of your brother in the day of his captivity, nor should you have rejoiced over the children of Judah in the day of their destruction, nor should you have spoken proudly in the day of distress. You should not have entered into the gates of my people in the day of their calamity. Indeed, you shall not have gazed on their affliction in the day of their calamity, nor laid hands on their substance in the day of their calamity. You should have not stood at the crossroads to cut off those among them who escaped, nor should you have delivered up those among them who remained in the day of their distress. Now, all of those accounts all happened in one time. Here's what happened. When the Babylonians came to Jerusalem and they razed the city, which means they knocked it down to nothing, they were taking people captive. If you had ever been there, you would know that people would be running out of town in every direction. And as people were hiding and running out of town, there was this group of Edomites, Amalekites, that they came to all the crossroads and they caught all the people that were escaping. Let them go. What's it got to do with you? Why in the world should this be a problem? But they caught all of the people that were escaping, and they turned them in as captives to Babylon. Like, what an awful and a terrible thing to do. And it's just simply another example of the very same treachery of this people. They had a spiritual hatred for Israel that was so bad that they would rather have cast their lot in with the Babylonians than with the people of God. They come in and they steal things in Israel. They come in and they take the captives and they send them all home. Because of all of those reasons, the Lord is saying, you, frankly, as a people, have manifest that you don't deserve to live. And we see the Edomites show up in the Bible one more time. Anybody know when the Edomites show up one more time? They have a different name. They're actually known as Idumea. Who's from Idumea? I'll give you a moment to think about it, because it's really worth having to go, oh, Herod the Great was from Idumea. Idumea is simply another name for Edom. And Herod the Great, who he liked to pretend that he was Jewish, though he wasn't really Jewish. He was from Esau's descendancy. What did Herod the Great and his people do to Jesus? Well, Herod he did kill the innocents, right? An Edomite, a descendant of Esau, tried to kill Christ. Herod's son killed John the Baptist. Herod's grandson killed, I think it was James the Less, one of the apostles. And Agrippa, who was also an Edomite of the same family, stood in judgment against Paul the Apostle when he was being sent to Israel. And the last iteration of Esau and his family was the Herodian dynasty, who thought that they could destroy Christianity from going on in the world. And 70 AD, finally, I'm going to read what was said about it. In 70 AD, the Idumeans, that's the Edomites, the Herod people, they joined the Israelis in their revolt against Rome, and Rome came and wiped out the Edomites and destroyed them, so that the descendants of Esau disappeared from human history. Because in the end, all that they were was a nemesis to the people of God, and it all went back to a grudge when, in fact, let me make the point this way. When we talk about small choices changing your life, just think about the day that Esau showed up and he was really hungry and he wanted to have some food. So earlier that day, or a day and a half before that, let's say instead of hunting over on this range or this mountain area, he decided that he would hunt on that mountain range. And so he's over there hunting, and he's gone for a day, and instead of being able to find good food, he's really hungry. That small choice, maybe it was that he shot at an antelope and missed it, or something, but he's starving. And so just small choices of which would appear to have no impact whatsoever, in the end resulting in him selling his birthright, losing his blessing, being hostile towards his brother Jacob, everything that happened in the land of Edom, attacking Israel in Exodus chapter 17, attacking Israel at the time of Saul, attacking Israel at the time of David, attacking Israel at the time of Esther, and attacking the Messiah at the time of the Lord Jesus Christ. And all of that goes back to the fact that he just simply made some bad choices. If there's ever a lesson for us, it's simply make good choices in the small areas of life. And secondly, I guess the Lord knew what he was talking about when he told Moses, I'm going to have a fight with the Amalekites until they're wiped out, because they certainly earned the dubious reputation of being anti-people of God. Any comments, questions, thoughts on any of that? You've probably never seen that connection as it goes through the whole Bible. Yeah, go ahead, Lauren, please. Right. The first time, 40 years earlier, they were going straight into the land. And then they came to Kadesh Barnea, and they had their rebellion. No, they were coming from the west. So they were coming from Egypt. They were in Saudi Arabia, and they were going to go straight into the land that then is from the south. Yeah. from the south, and they were going to go to the left side of the Dead Sea. They were going to go straight north. But when they got to Kadesh Barnea, which was the southern border, 12 spies went to spy into Canaan, 10 were bad, 2 were good. And because of that, then they wandered in the wilderness for 40 years. And then that time they actually did go through the land of Edom, Moab, and Ammon, which is probably what you're thinking about. They went around the east side, came up to the central, and then they did go on. So later on they did go through that land. But they weren't going to the first time. So fascinating. I mean, we don't know our maps very well, really to understand those things, but it's significant. And if I could add, I'm sorry to just sit here and wander all day long. During the time of the tribulation period, there's going to be 3 countries that are not controlled by the Antichrist. And it's the region of Ammon, Moab, and Edom. That they're going to remain separate during that time, because the land of Edom is going to be a place known as Petra. That's where that is, where the children of Israel, the Jewish nation, will hide. They'll go down there and hide during the tribulation period. And so, just a unique history, extra detail about who they are. So, all right, let's go ahead and pray. Thank you for the good comments and your attention. Father God, thank you for this day and for your love. Thank you, Lord, for the encouragement that we should receive from the text, to always walk with you and be faithful. We thank you, Lord, that your judgments are always true and right, and that in the end, that good triumphs over evil, that Joshua triumphed over Amalek, that David triumphed over the Amalekites, that Esther triumphed over Haman, and that Christ in the end triumphed even over the Idumeans, the Herod, the great dynasty, because we know you and are on your side. We thank you for these things this day. Bless us now, we ask it in Jesus' name.